Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into something absolutely fundamental, like really core to any kind of structured thinking. Whether you're doing serious academic research, maybe trying to solve a tricky business problem, or, even just figuring out why your favorite houseplant gave up the ghost last week.
Yeah, it applies more broadly than people think.
We are talking about that essential journey, going from having a burning question to forming a prediction you can actually test, moving from a research question to a hypothesis.
It might sound a bit dry, maybe academic, but honestly, understanding this, it's like getting the blueprint for how knowledge gets built, how problems get solved in a structured way.
Yeah.
It's foundational stuff.
It really is the bedrock, isn't it? And for this deep dive, we're drawing on some great material we came across.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, specifically, it's an excerpt from a PDF guide. It's called From Research Question to Hypothesis, a step-by-step guide. We found it originally shared from the Instagram account Akademik Practices.
Academic practices.
Yeah.
They put out some really useful content.
They really do. So a big shout out to them for this clear resource.
It sounds like a good one. It breaks down a process that, let's be honest, can feel pretty overwhelming into manageable steps.
Exactly. So our mission right now is to walk you through that guide, pull out the key bits, the crucial insights, and help you quickly grasp the absolute essentials. Think of your research question and the hypothesis that follows as your study's compass.
Or its backbone, maybe.
Yeah, backbone works too. It doesn't just hint at what you're looking into, it completely dictates how you'll investigate it, and importantly, why it's even worth pursuing.
And the reason this matters to you listening, even if, writing a thesis isn't on your radar,
Right.
is that this structure, it's how claims are evaluated, how theories get tested. When you hear someone present something as fact, understanding this process helps you ask, okay, wait, what was the underlying question there? What prediction were they actually testing? It's like a critical thinking superpower.
Totally agree. A superpower. Okay, so let's jump right in. What is a research question, according to this guide, and why is it just so important?
Well, the guide calls it the concrete expression of scientific curiosity. I really like that phrase. It's basically you pointing directly at the central problem or the specific knowledge gap that's driving your whole investigation. You're articulating precisely what you don't know and what you need to find out.
And the source really hammers home how crucial this is. It's not just deciding on a topic. The question itself determines your entire research design.
Everything.
Yeah, the methods you'll use, the data you'll collect, how you'll analyze it. It shapes literally everything that follows.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And the guide gives us 4 key characteristics of a good research question. Things to aim for. First off, clarity. It has to be crystal clear, totally understandable.
Makes sense. If you can't even state the question clearly, how can anyone, including yourself, figure out how to answer it? Ambiguity is like the enemy here.
Exactly. Second, it needs to be specific. This is where a lot of people, especially early on, kind of stumble. It needs to be focused on a particular topic, not some huge, sprawling area.
Oh, this is the classic trap. The guide gives a perfect example of a poor question. How does technology affect people?
Right. And you can immediately feel how vague that is. Like what technology? A pencil, AI, everything in between.
And which people? Everyone. Kids. Seniors.
And affect how? Their happiness, their bank accounts, their social skills. It's just
Completely unmanageable. You could research that forever and barely scratch the surface. It's way too broad, too abstract, and frankly unmeasurable in any practical way.
Now, compare that, like the guide does, to a good question. Does the frequency of using digital course materials by university students affect their academic performance?
Oh, okay. Now that's different. You've got specifics, digital course materials. Okay, that's the tech. University students, that's the people. And specific things to measure, frequency of using and academic performance.
Yeah, you can actually see how you could design a study around that question.
Which leads right to the third characteristic the guide mentions. A good question produces researchable and measurable data.
If you can't collect evidence to address your question, it just stays as, philosophical speculation, maybe. Not really a scientific research question. You need concrete indicators, things you can actually observe or quantify.
That makes total sense. Your question has a point towards something you can actually, measure.
And finally, the guide says, a good question should have the potential to contribute to the field. You're not just rehashing what everyone already knows. You're trying to add a new piece to the puzzle, fill a specific gap you've identified.
Okay, so finding that clear, specific, measurable, and potentially contributing question, that's the critical first step. But how do you actually get there? It feels like a big leap from just having a general interest to landing on that really refined question.
Yeah, it can be. But the guide offers a really practical three-step process for developing it. Step 1, conduct a literature review.
Right. This is where you dive into what's already been done. You read the existing studies, the articles, the books in your area. What questions did other researchers ask? What did they find? What methods did they use?
And the core goal here isn't just to get smart on the topic, although that definitely happens.
Yeah.
It's really about spotting the gaps, finding the contradictions maybe, or the areas that just haven't been fully explored yet. You're, like they say, standing on the shoulders of giants, but you're specifically looking for where their view doesn't quite reach. This helps make sure your question is original, but also builds on what's known.
Yeah, exactly. It stops you from accidentally reinventing the wheel, or even worse, trying to answer a question that was definitively settled like 50 years ago.
There. Okay, step 2 is focusing and narrowing down. This is often the trickiest part, I think, especially for beginners.
This is where you take that broad area you're interested in, maybe something that popped out during your lit review, and you start carving out a smaller, more manageable piece of it.
Yeah. The guide uses a great example, starting with just online shopping, which is huge.
Massively huge. Still almost as broad as that technology example earlier.
Totally. So the process of narrowing it down, maybe in several steps, could lead you to something much more focused, like the effect of user reviews on purchasing decisions in mobile app-based online shopping.
Wow. Okay, that is a transformation. You've gone from this vast ocean to a specific little bay, looking at a particular interaction, user reviews, purchasing decisions within a defined context, mobile app shopping. That feels like something you could actually research.
Exactly. That intentional narrowing is just key to getting specific and measurable. And then once you think you've got your question pretty well honed, step 3 is to evaluate it using the SMART technique.
Ah, SMART, the old reliable acronym. Used in project management, goal setting, and yeah, definitely for research questions too.
It's such a fantastic sanity check. You basically hold your drafted question up against these 5 criteria. Let's see. Specific, is it clear and focused enough?
Measurable. Can you actually collect data to answer it?
A, achievable.
Yeah.
Is it realistic? Like, do you have the resources, the time?
Relevant. Does it actually matter? Does it contribute something?
And T, time-bound. Can you reasonably answer this within a practical time frame? Or is it a lifelong project?
Using SMART is like bringing in a really strict editor, isn't it?
Yeah.
It forces you to be practical and helps make sure you don't launch into a research journey that's just, well, impossible to finish.
Right. So literature review to find the gaps, narrow down your focus, and then a SMART check to ensure it's viable. That's your path, according to the guide, to a good research question.
And with that clear, specific, measurable research question finally nailed down, you are perfectly set up for the next crucial step, formulating your hypothesis.
Yes. And the guide defines a hypothesis pretty simply as a predictable answer to your research question.
I like thinking of it as your educated guess, your tentative prediction about the relationship between the things you're studying.
That's a good way to put it. It's basically you saying, okay, based on what I know or think I know from my lit review and maybe some early observations, I predict this is going to happen. The source phrases it like, this possibility is true because...
So if your question was, say, does X affect Y, your hypothesis is your best guess about how X affects Y, or maybe if it affects it at all.
Let's use the guide's example again to see this transition really clearly. Remember the research question. Does social media addiction affect the academic performance of adolescents?
Yep.
Got it. Okay, so the hypothesis derived from that question is, as the level of social media addiction increases, the academic performance of adolescents decreases.
Ah, okay. Look at that. The hypothesis doesn't just guess if there's an effect. It predicts the direction of the effect. More addiction leads to lower performance.
Exactly. It's a specific, testable prediction that directly answers the question posed.
And the source points out that this example hypothesis is both directional, it says increase, decrease, and measurable. You can find ways to measure social media addiction levels, and you can measure academic performance. That measurability piece keeps coming up.
It has to. It shows how the hypothesis really builds directly on that well-defined question. Your hypothesis becomes your working theory, the specific statement you're going to put to the test with your research design.
Right. Now, the guide also introduces us to the 2 main types of hypotheses we usually encounter, especially when we're talking about, say, quantitative research.
First up, you've got the research hypothesis, sometimes called the alternative hypothesis. You often see it symbolized as H.
Okay, H, Eero. And this is basically your main prediction, right? The statement that usually aligns with what you actually expect or hope to find. It assumes there is some significant relationship or effect between your variables.
Correct. The example given in the guide is, students who conduct comprehensive literature reviews submit their theses in a shorter period. C. This hypothesis states there is a relationship doing good lit reviews impacts thesis completion time.
Okay, so H is usually the interesting one, the one you're kind of rooting for. What's the other type then?
That would be the null hypothesis, often written as HA. And this is where things can feel a little counterintuitive for some people at first.
Okay.
The null hypothesis essentially states the opposite of the research hypothesis. It assumes there is no significant difference or no significant relationship between the variables you're looking at.
Wait, so if my research hypothesis is more study time leads to higher grades, then my null hypothesis would be something like the amount of study time has no significant effect on grades.
Precisely. The guide's example for null hypothesis is gender has no effect on the duration of thesis completion. It basically posits that any difference you might happen to see in completion times between genders is just down to random chance, not a systematic effect of gender itself.
That feels backward. If I think study time does matter, why would I start my testing by formally stating that it doesn't?
And this is a really key insight, even though the source only touches on it briefly. In statistical testing, the standard approach is actually to test the null hypothesis. We're not directly trying to prove our research hypothesis.
Okay, go on.
Instead, we're trying to gather enough statistical evidence to allow us to reject the null hypothesis.
So you assume there's no relationship, you collect your data, and then if your data looks really, really unlikely if that no relationship idea were true, then you say, okay, I can probably reject the idea that there's no effect.
Exactly. And by process of elimination, if you reject the null, you lend support to your alternative, your research hypothesis.
Got it. You're essentially asking, assuming nothing interesting is actually happening here, how likely is it I'd see the data pattern I actually got? If the answer is very unlikely, you conclude that, well, something interesting is probably happening, and that something interesting is usually described by your H.
It's a more rigorous way to approach it. Helps avoid jumping to conclusions based on what might just be random fluctuations in the data.
That's a powerful framework once you kind of get your head around it. Okay, so we have our question leading to our predicted answer, our hypothesis, and its opposite, HE arrow. What are the crucial things the guide says we need to keep in mind when we're actually writing down that hypothesis?
Right. They list several key considerations. First, clarity. Again, just like the research question, your hypothesis needs to be absolutely crystal clear about what relationship or difference you're predicting. No ambiguity.
Right. Everyone needs to know exactly what you're testing.
Second, testability. This one's non-negotiable. Your hypothesis must be something you can actually verify or potentially falsify through observation or experimentation. If you can't figure out a way to test your prediction with data, it's not really a scientific hypothesis.
And this loops right back to the measurable part of the research question, doesn't it? If the question isn't leading you to measurable things, the hypothesis based on it won't be testable either. They're super tightly linked.
Totally linked. Which brings us to the third point. Define your variables. The guide stresses you need to explicitly define your dependent and independent variables before you even formulate the hypothesis.
So you need to be clear on what you think is causing a change that's the independent variable and what you think is being changed or affected the dependent variable.
Spot on. Like in the social media example. Social media addiction level is independent, the potential cause, and academic performance is dependent, the potential effect.
Okay, what else?
Fourth, directionality. As we saw in the examples, the guide suggests indicating the direction of the effect if it makes sense. If your theory or the existing literature strongly suggests that X will increase Y or decrease Y, your hypothesis should ideally state that direction.
It makes the prediction more specific, maybe even a bit riskier than just saying X affects Y without saying how.
It often does, yeah.
Yeah.
Though sometimes hypotheses are non-directional. Maybe if you predict a difference exists, but you're not sure which way it will go. And finally, assumptions. The guide says, stating the assumptions underlying your hypothesis is essential for scientific validity.
Assumptions? Like what kind of assumptions are we talking about here?
Well, things like assuming your measurement tools are actually measuring what you think they are. and doing it reliably. Or assuming your sample group is reasonably representative of the larger population you want to talk about. Or maybe assuming certain background conditions stay stable during your study.
Ah, okay. Things you're taking for granted for the study to work.
Pretty much. Every study operates within a context and relies on certain premises. Being explicit about these assumptions adds transparency. It helps others correctly interpret your findings and understand their limitations.
Those are really solid practical points to check against when you're actually drafting that hypothesis. Clarity, testability, defining variables, directionality, and being aware of your assumptions.
Yeah, and the guide then provides a few more quick examples of question-hypothesis pairings, which are great for just seeing these concepts click together.
Okay, let's run through them quickly. First pairing. Research question. Does attitude toward distance learning affect academic achievement?
And the hypothesis. A positive attitude toward distance learning positively affects academic achievement.
I see.
Clear question, clear predicted positive direction, more positive attitude, better achievement.
Makes sense. Second pairing, research question. What is the effect of humor in advertisements on consumer perception?
Hypothesis. Humorous advertisements foster positive attitudes toward the brand. Again, question asks about an effect. Hypothesis predicts a specific positive effect on attitude.
Okay, and the third one, research question. Does the frequency of meetings with a thesis advisor affect thesis submission time?
Hypothesis. Students who meet frequently with their advisors complete their theses in a shorter time, predicting that more meetings lead to less time. These examples really nail how a well-defined question just naturally flows into a specific, testable, often directional prediction.
They really show that clear, logical path the guide is laying out. Now, one really practical question that definitely comes up when you're actually in the messy reality of doing research is, what if your initial prediction, your hypothesis, doesn't seem to be working out as you collect data? Can you just change it?
Ah, good question. And the guide addresses this directly. The answer is basically yes, you can revise a hypothesis.
Okay. It calls this a restructure hypothesis process, I think.
Yeah, something like that. The idea is as you get deeper into your research, maybe as you analyze some early data, or even just as you understand the literature more thoroughly, you might gain new insights. And these insights might suggest your initial prediction needs, well, tweaking.
Maybe the direction you predicted was wrong, or maybe the relationship is just more complicated than you first thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes sense, right? Research isn't always this perfectly straight line from A to B. You learn things as you go.
Definitely.
And the guide does note that this flexibility, this ability to revise your hypothesis as the study unfolds, is maybe particularly characteristic of qualitative research.
Ah, right. Where the design is often more iterative and adaptable anyway, compared to some more fixed quantitative study designs.
Precisely. So it's not like it's rigidly set in stone on day one. Your hypothesis is your best initial guess, your starting point, but it's okay to refine that guess based on what you actually learned during the investigation.
It's about letting the emerging understanding shape where you're going, but still keeping things structured.
Well put.
Okay, so as we bring this deep dive toward a close, let's just circle back to that really powerful core message from this guide. It concludes by emphasizing that nailing down your research question, carefully formulating your hypothesis, and making sure those two align perfectly. That isn't just a step, it's the fundamental foundation of any effective research.
Yeah, the guide uses that metaphor of them being the compass for your scientific journey.
Yeah.
They give you direction, they keep you focused, and they provide the essential framework for literally everything else you do in the study.
And that takeaway thought from the source is just so clear and memorable. A well-crafted research question leads to the right hypothesis, and the right hypothesis leads to meaningful research.
It really underscores that putting in the time and the rigorous thought at these initial stages, that's paramount if you want to end up with valuable, insightful findings later on.
Absolutely. So here's maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on, building on the wisdom from this guide. If defining a crystal clear problem, that's the research question, and then stating a specific testable prediction for its solution or outcome, that's the hypothesis, provides the essential compass for navigating complex research. How could consciously applying that exact same structured way of thinking, getting ruthlessly clear on the real problem first and then formulating a testable best guess solution, how could that help you navigate challenges or make better decisions in your own work, maybe your personal life, or heck, even your plant care, completely outside of any formal study?
It's really about bringing that structured inquiry into everyday thinking, isn't it?
I think so. It turns those vague worries or just broad interests into something much more like an actionable exploration. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into that fundamental process, moving from research question to hypothesis, guided by that excellent material from academic practices.
Yeah, we hope this has given you a clear map maybe for structuring your own inquiries, whatever they might be.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.